Welcome to our special called August 17, 2022 meeting of the City of Tuscaloosa Planning and Zoning Commission. This meeting allows for alternative participation in order to accommodate all citizens. Any written comments sent to staff were forwarded to the commission directly. This time, I'd like to introduce staff: Ashley Kreitz, Executive Director; Zach Pons, Acting Director of Planning; Will Smith, Associate Director of Planning; Jimbo Woodson, Deputy City Attorney. There are 9 members of the Planning Commission, all who were appointed by the mayors for staggered terms, with the exception of the City Council representative, who is appointed by the City Council. I will ask the commission members to introduce themselves and state their occupation, beginning with Ms. Prince.
Dina Prince, attorney.
Vince Dooley, UA Construction Administration.
Tim Harrison, general contractor.
Eddie Pugh, retired.
Bill Wright, business owner. There are sign-up sheets outside for public comment. If you do not sign up, you will be given an opportunity to speak. Those wishing to comment on the proposed code updates have notified staff in advance of the meeting and will be provided the opportunity for remarks during the public comment portion of the agenda. Those participating virtually or written comment have notified staff and will be introduced prior to providing comment or having their comments read into the record. The commission will take up items in order of the agenda. The commission will receive a presentation from staff regarding proposed zoning text changes for the articles identified for discussion. The commission will vote to recommend or not recommend these amendments. Note that the Planning and Zoning Commission is a recommending body for zoning text and zoning map changes. The City Council is the final authority. After the staff presentation, the floor will be open for public comment. Individuals wishing to express support or opposition will be given 2 to 3 minutes to speak. Only the Planning Commission can grant a specified time extension to an individual. We will begin with those parties in person tonight, followed by those participating virtually. When it's your turn for comment, staff will introduce you to the commission to provide your remarks. Those who have provided written comments will have those read into the record by staff. Public comment will be received, the floor closed to public comment, and the commission will open discussion among themselves, reserving the opportunity to vote to accept or reject any proposed changes for final consideration at the review meetings that will take place in 2023. These proceedings are video recorded and broadcast live. All in-person comments should be made at the podium into the microphone. Comments made by phone or virtually are video recorded through the conferencing application. Please first state your name and address for the record. Jurisdiction. Regarding zoning text amendments, Section 115276 of the Code of Alabama states, the legislative body of such municipality shall provide for the manner in which such regulations and restrictions and the boundaries of such district shall be determined, established, and enforced from time to time, amended, supplemented, or changed, and may adopt such ordinance as may be necessary to carry into effect and make effective the provisions of this article. The Planning and Zoning Commission serves as a recommending body to the legislative body. While the zoning text amendments will be considered in pieces, they will not be enforced until the full zoning text is adopted and the planning map changes implemented. In layman's terms, if there is a vote at any point to recommend changes, they will not be enforced on any property until the City Council adopts the zoning text and zoning map changes formally through many public hearings. At this time, I would ask, do any members of the commission have any conflicts of interest or possible conflicts for any topics on the agenda discussion this evening? If so, please state for the record. Having heard none, and with that, we will begin.
All right, Commission, we have hit the point of time in these meetings where the water bottle's got to come with me because there's a lot of words to be said. So I apologize, and I'm so thankful for you being here this evening. We get to talk about the downtown and the river areas tonight, but first let's go over those meeting expectations, of course. Steering committee members, please note your role in the process if you speak and provide public comment. Planning Commission members, of course, you've gotten a chance to review the draft code articles. Refrain from arguing, listen, ask questions. If you need clarification, be respectful and look to desire an expedited proceeding. For everyone, we will begin these meetings at 5 and end at 7. If for whatever reason we don't get finished, we will roll that into the next scheduled meeting. We'll utilize a 3-minute timer visible to all parties, and the Commission, as Mr. Wright mentioned, are the only group that can grant a specified time extension and staff will be managing the flow of the meeting for efficiency's sake. Remember, of course, that this code rewrite is going to maintain what works today and update what doesn't. And the nice thing about the downtown and the river areas is we've got a lot of good in there already. There's also some things that are challenging and could stand to be updated. This is supposed to make the code more user-friendly by implementing the comprehensive plan's recommendations. We'll be redefining, consolidating existing zoning districts, possibly adding some new ones, and then updating development standards and permitted uses. Of course, in this process, we are taking this one bite at a time, looking at the zoning text first, by looking first at the purpose, intensity, and dimensional standards. That's what we'll be discussing this evening, specific to the downtown and river areas. We'll begin to get into development standards, and then finally we will close out with use standards before we change the colors on a map. Of course, we are looking within Article 4 of the zoning code outline for this. Article 4 will be our zoning districts with more than 30 zoning districts to regulate land use and development. Now, really quickly, and I think this came up quite a bit as part of our stakeholder engagement meetings, and I have been hesitant to do this, but we're going to, because I want to make sure there is that recollection and the difference between what is planning, what is zoning. So during the comprehensive plan process, of course, we created that future land use character map and those future land use categories. Of course, you saw things like traditional neighborhood core, which today could encompass anything from an R1 to an R4, even some of our RA1s. Your multifamily residential category and character type would be your multifamily residential and multifamily residential zoning districts today. Remembering that the future land use character map is not a mandate. So as we move through these character types that then inspired the zoning districts, and then we go to change the map down the road a bit, we'll remember that this is not a mandate. Mr. Rumsey has entered the building. I like it. I'm glad you're here, Mr. Rumsey. Thank you. Remembering that the future land use and character map will not be a mandate. Those colors that you saw on the map, those specific lines, are not a mandate. Things can shift around some. We're going to use that as a policy guide for how we create these zoning districts and how we fix our zoning regulations as well. It could be the basis for potential future zoning updates, and then multiple zoning districts could be appropriate to implement a future land use type. Now, the cool thing about tonight is we have 4 zoning districts that we're talking about and 4 colors on a map. We can start to make some assumptions about where things could go. So with that being said, remember that your land use type definitions in framework looked like this, and we'll be reviewing them with each zoning district this evening, just as that brief reminder. This is really, again, the first time that we've been able to take a land use character type and say this was the zoning district that came out of it. So remember, we had an intent, primary uses, secondary uses, building blocks. Let's get into it. So we have the downtown and river districts. There are 4. You have the downtown river, or the riverfront, downtown perimeter, and the downtown historic edge. And so we are looking at those areas this evening from your future land use character map that could be colored, this beautiful purple color. That's our river area. Your downtown core is located in that, I'm going to go burgundy. This wine color is more of your downtown perimeter. And your downtown historic edge, as we fondly labeled it a long time ago, was historic pink. And so those are those areas that we're talking about. And you'll note that that downtown perimeter even crosses a little bit over 15th Street into the Drish House area on the other side. So let's get into some notes on the downtown and riverfront both. They include additional standards like building and design material standards. Instead of having, hey, it should look like this, it could look like that, we're outlining primary and secondary materials. We include building massing and scale elements with architectural details like recesses, projections, pedestrian entrances, etc. Site standards for sidewalks, building entrances, parking access, where parking is situated, where the loading is, mechanical screening, lighting. We talk a little bit about sign regulations, and I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to talk about signs at a different date. We're going to loop all of the signs together because in the feedback that we receive from the stakeholders, we're limiting ourselves in what's currently outlined in the code. We're too restrictive in some aspects. We're not restrictive enough in some others. We need to make sure that we talk about signs also to address some of the recent Supreme Court rulings. We need to look at awning, canopy, and balcony regulations. And then specific to the riverfront, there are regulations for features within flood hazard areas. So getting into our first district this evening, the downtown district really carries forward and renames what you know today as a BC located in the downtown riverfront overlay district. It incorporates and simplifies those form standards that you know as you review downtown riverfront overlay district projects, and it incorporates guidance from the downtown core character type. So you see that purpose on the left-hand side, providing walkable, visually attractive, and economically vital mix of employment, entertainment, civic, etc. uses within our historic downtown, consistent with the downtown's historic character, making sure it's architecturally interesting and pedestrian-friendly. So this was that character type from Framework. We have cut and pasted it onto that big screen for you, and you see what that intent was, and the purpose statement and the intent. So we wanted to make sure that was included into the zoning district itself. Really pertinent to today, though, I want to focus on the building blocks. Let's not look at those primary uses in the middle. We're just going to cover those up for a second because we are not talking use tonight. But building blocks on the right-hand side of your screen, you see your height ranges. The intent was 2 stories minimum. The building form, a variety of freestanding buildings, generally set back from 0 to 10 feet, consistent within a block. Gridded street patterns, 8 to 12 foot wide sidewalks, shared surface parking, and little pockets of open space. So what you get in terms of your dimensions and your intensity standards are front setbacks from 0 to 10 feet, which is consistent with today, the standards and guidelines. Building height, minimum of 2 stories. Currently, there is no maximum in downtown. They continue to propose no maximum building height in downtown. So some quick notes and things to think about and talk about as a group, because that's what we're here to do this evening. The stakeholder engagement and involvement that we had before this meeting opened up some questions that I think we need to discuss. So right now, building heights, as I mentioned, we have no maximum in a BC today. You can build whatever height you'd like. So do we maintain that, or do you look at capping it at a certain story height that is consistent with your existing buildings today? I think that's something for us to think about. I know in some of the discussions there's a real and an understandable fear that we're about to have another 50-year-old zoning ordinance, that we're going to do all of this good work, and whatever we do is going to have to last us another 50 years. That's not the intent at all, but I do understand some of the concerns that what if something changes? What if something exponential changes and we've limited ourselves in some respect, or that we've grown and we've blown up enough that there is a need for something taller. I don't know. It's a good discussion point.
My personal opinion is I don't think we need to limit it. I mean, I don't know. I think we limit our potential for our future. I think if our other requirements as far as materials and setbacks and things are the same, those can apply and effectively affect the height. Obviously, it's going to be lot size and such, but I personally don't think we limit it.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Commission, I think I turned a lot of your microphones to red at some point. If you'll just make sure they're all green.
Do you have an opinion?
Ooh, thank you, Mr. Rumsey. What was that?
Do you have an opinion?
Do I have an opinion? I'm torn. I see both sides of it, honestly. I also think that because we have no height limitations today, and I don't want to be so short-sighted that we mess something up. But today, the things that are going up could have unlimited height. And you see them kind of coming in around that 6 to 8 story mark. They're not getting much higher, even though they could.
What would be the advantages of having a maximum? Just,
What
Like-
you end up doing is saying, this is how tall we want Tuscaloosa to be. You end up saying, okay, we don't want anything taller than, I think we're calling it the Trustmark building today. And I don't know that that's necessarily good, because you end up with a very stagnant looking downtown. You know those places that have height restrictions in place because, or like a height cap potentially. I know in some of the discussions where height has come up, there's that worry about, well, can fire, what if fire can't reach the top of it? If we ever reach that point, we're going to cross that bridge. I was telling the planning staff, I remember when we were living in northwest Louisiana, a new casino hotel was being built. And that casino hotel was so tall that the fire department didn't have equipment to access it. And that casino ended up purchasing, or like mostly purchasing, doing a 75% cost to get a fire truck that would make it and would manage, So I think if something comes in that we can't serve, the fire department's going to have to say that we can't do this right now. We're going to have to figure something out. So,
That's what I was about to ask.
yeah.
There may be other stipulations that prevent us from going to a certain
Right.
height.
Exactly.
Like that.
There's some of that, and frankly, construction, the way that construction costs are and construction requirements over a certain story, like, what is it, Mr. Harrison? It's 6 to 8 stories you have to go with metal studs? I don't remember.
Oh, I mean, over 5, you can't go over 5 with wood stuff.
There we
Right,
go.
yeah.
So all of a sudden, you start increasing costs at 6 stories. So it's something to think about.
I guess one reason I don't want to handicap Tuscaloosa's future by limiting building heights. We obviously are a university-driven town, and we've got several large MBUSI and other large entities in Tuscaloosa, and the opportunity with having a university town and an R&D park or an R&D development somewhere downtown that would coincide with some of what they're doing. I just think it potentially limits our future.
Okay. In terms of building materials, there were a few notes from those stakeholder meetings. Consider, and these are things that we can pass along, just some notes to make for you as the commission. Consider requiring the material changes to require that we don't do material changes at outside corners. There are a lot of things within this draft ordinance that you saw about requiring material changes to break up front facades. That can look a little disjointed if it's only done at outside corners. Native stone should be referred to as natural stone because it opens up the question of native to where. And so we also want to make sure we provide examples of what that natural stone is that could be utilized. Glass curtain walls are shown as a primary material within this current draft, but a few folks noted that they may not actually be consistent with the intent of the downtown, which, as you'll recall, was to maintain that historic character of downtown. We do have a very masonry downtown, very academic, old brick downtown. So do we want to move that glass curtain wall to an accent material? And similarly, precast masonry is more consistent with the intent, something like the federal building? And do we end up moving that material into a primary?
If you use that precast, maybe this is a question for Tim, that precast stone that you're making, maybe it's not real stone, but you're making what looks like native, natural stone, is that disallowed by this language?
I think she's on item D calls similarly precast masonry, so I think that would move into that. Is that adequate?
But they're not putting that native or natural stone in there to say if it's not the real thing, or in other words, if you make it and it looks real, can you use it?
Correct, or a synthetic equivalent is what the rest of that says. So.
Thank you.
Within the balcony materials, it does say that brick and masonry balconies are permitted. I think, and it is understandable, those do seem impractical, but also taking it out of the list may be unnecessary. If someone can figure out how to engineer it and how to make it happen, frankly, in my opinion, more power to them, because that would be a very strong, sturdy-looking balcony. For parking screening, would we like to differentiate between the street level and upper levels? And then the transparency minimum is 30% adjacent to street level facades. It's a minimum of 30%. A few folks have noted that may not be enough. A few folks have said, hey, that's cool because it allows us to kind of do what we need to. So just some things to think about in terms of building materials. Is there anything on there that y'all want to tackle right now?
I think on the transparency, the word minimum is fine.
Okay.
30%.
Yeah, that's what.
I mean, it's going to give you the opportunity to open it up if you want.
Any thoughts on the glass curtain wall or the precast masonry?
Yeah, I think what you have on the glass curtain wall makes sense in terms
To
of.
move it to an accent
Yes.
material?
I mean, for what we're trying to accomplish with the look of downtown, it
That's
makes
true.
sense.
So you would move it from 75% to 25%?
Mm-hmm.
Can you give me a quick example, and I'm sorry, I don't know, what is a glass curtain wall?
Think about Synovus Building on the riverfront. That's a good,
Oh,
that's our
okay,
real
okay,
only
yeah.
example
Oh,
in
yeah.
downtown.
Yeah.
What about that precast masonry idea?
Well, if it's like that, I don't think it is consistent with your intent. That's just my opinion personally.
Okay.
I mean, I would, from an aesthetic standpoint, think that the precast masonry would be more consistent, but
Okay. We'll make that note. There is a note within the draft that begins to talk about building massing and saying that there should be changes in, on the end of page 458, building massing and scale. So if the street-facing facade of a building is more than 40 feet wide, and at least one of the following design elements shall be incorporated into the facade at least once every 40 feet along the width of the facade. I enjoyed the comment from somebody that said that 40-foot wide rule could lead to a very ransom note style development. And I'd never heard that ransom note style before, but it really sticks with you, where you're cutting shapes out of a magazine and, putting them onto a piece of paper. I think what the intent really should be is to create those subtle differences within a facade so that something still looks and it maintains that character. You think about the French Quarter. Those buildings are all very different, subtly different. And they all go together. You know when you're looking at one compared to another. And so I think we may want to change that language around a little bit to not say it has to be distinct in that change. It should be subtle and similar with what's surrounding it if it's one building that's being created, potentially. I'm just throwing ideas at y'all. Okay, we'll go to the next one. In terms of screening on the roofs, we want to make sure that parapet walls should extend along all visible sides of a building roof so that the unfinished backside isn't visible. You see that a lot, especially as you go over the bridge. You see the back sides of those parapet walls. If it's visible, we should probably make sure it gets screened. I'm channeling, I hear Robert Reynolds somewhere from those meetings, but it is a good point. So much of our roofs are visible. With lighting, we want to specify and say that lighting should be directed downward. And again, signs, we are just going to revisit this entire section as a whole. Because right now, the current draft wouldn't allow a sign like you see at Bama or at the Dinah Washington Center. We probably need to re-examine how neon, LED, the size, message centers, canopy signs, awnings, all of it are addressed within downtown because the way we interact with downtown is just changing.
Are we having a lot of requests for signage that are not meeting the sign ordinance? Is that
No.
the problem?
We're not. It's just the way that this got drafted, really, there was something in there about like a 6-foot tall A-frame sign, which, I mean, that's a bit much for an A-frame in the sidewalk. So you really don't want to see an A-frame sign that's honestly much taller than 4 feet. There were some comments about neon signs, like neon using as an architectural accent only, as opposed to possibly some channel neon letter signs. I know those don't get made very often, but those are very reminiscent of downtowns. So we just want to take a look at it, and when we have an opportunity.
When will we make these final decisions?
For the sign, or for life generally,
Well,
for
the-
signs, I'm gonna have a whole day on signs, y'all. We're gonna have fun. I'm sure Mr. Holt will be here and some others, but we'll have a whole day on signs. I forgot what day that is. But we're keeping with the schedule as we've lined out. So I think I've got us going through May of 2023 right now. I know, guys. We're gonna spend so much time together.
So the height downtown, there's not a building height maximum.
Today there is none, no.
And in fact, you think probably we ought to leave it because we don't know what the future holds in building materials and things, in other words, they keep coming up with ways to do things, and that might box us in. Okay.
Yeah, it may be something better than what we have now.
Let's hop to the riverfront. All right, so the riverfront, of course, the base of it, that our district is going to build on what we know as the Riverfront Development District, basically in terms of the current purpose, the current standards of am I having a stroke right now? It's fine. The purpose and standards in the current zoning ordinance, but we're modifying that structure. I know all of you as the Planning Commission, you have seen a Riverfront Development District application. Y'all know the back end of it is cumbersome and questionable at best because it leaves everything out in the open. There's so much ambiguity within it. We want to make sure the standards are clear, and I think that's what you see within this draft. We want to simplify the development review procedures for development and redevelopment within the riverfront areas, clarify development standards. So again, that riverfront district is to provide and support pedestrian-friendly and high-quality development along the Black Warrior River, helping to protect against flooding, preserving natural features. We want to make sure that there is synergy with the natural riverfront environment. So the riverfront development character type from Framework, you'll see on the screen in front of you. And then those building blocks, the height range 2 stories minimum, being cognizant of protecting river views. Building form is a mix of large footprint buildings, smaller buildings, could have multiple tenants. Building setback is going to be 0 to 30 feet to allow integration with the topography. You see small grid-like blocks with a streetscape, etc. So when we get into the riverfront procedure, you saw within that code the way we're starting to tackle the behemoth that is the current Riverfront Development District zoning district that we know today. We're dividing it into 2. We're saying there is small-scale development that is 20,000 square feet or less of non-residential development, and/or 20 residential units or development on a lot that is 25,000 square feet or less. If it's not small-scale development, it is large-scale development that has to go through a riverfront planned development process. We will tackle that process in the future, so let's not worry about what that looks like tonight. But just know that there will be a separate review process for our riverfront, and we'll get into that in the future. Yes, sir.
So at 25,000 square feet and less is small.
Mhm.
And it doesn't require that book,
Right. No more books.
but anything over 25,000 requires very intense.
Yes. It's
I've
things.
seen many of them.
I know. We've got a whole drawer full of those mini books. And thankfully, they've all become digital mini books, but you basically need a whole server to keep some of them. So for the base district that are intensity and dimensional standards, your front setback, we're looking at 10 feet, sides of 4, rears of 10. Building height would be 40 feet and a maximum of 3 stories. Now, again, this is not for that riverfront planned development, that large-scale development. So notes on this section, and there's quite a few. I think there's about 10 or 11 from our stakeholder meetings, and we've had some, again, really great conversations on this process. We know the setback minimums are going to need to be adjusted to account for townhomes if that becomes a permitted use. Your side setbacks especially will become problematic if you have to have a side setback of 4 feet, but a townhome is an attached product. So it's little things like that, little tweaks. Our multifamily dwelling parking requirement is 1 per bedroom. And folks kept saying that's very student-driven. You know, the idea of parking per bedroom is a very student-oriented and student-driven concept. So do we want to consider per unit for multifamily? Do we want to maintain, I think is a big question, the 500-foot spacing. This only applies to bars or gastropubs, if any locate within the riverfront. Now, to be fair, we don't have any today, but that's not to say that we wouldn't in the future potentially, or someone might want to integrate a bar or a gastropub into that space. Well, what this code is saying, what our current code says, is if I've got one here, I can't have one for another 501 feet measured door to door. Do we want to maintain that as we're being forward thinking?
Can you show the outline of this district on the map again?
Yeah.
Let me see, if you don't
Mr.
mind,
Pons,
Ashley.
would
I
you-
know we gotta go back.
Mr. Pons is going to be faster
So that would
than
be
I will.
about 1 every 400 yards, is that right? Well, 500 feet would be 2, I'm talking about as far as a length of a football field would be 300 feet, right?
Yes. So you could have
150 yards?
So we're talking
that dark purple color, and I didn't grab the whole area, of course, just to start that conversation. But you're looking at, this is Riverfront Village here. And of
Right.
course, you cross the river, you've
Right.
got everything north of the river, and then you've got that portion to the west of Jack Warner Parkway, Amphitheater, et cetera, the country club area.
okay.
So you've got a lot of potential for redevelopment on the north side of the river especially, and of course what's to the west on the south side.
Okay, go back to your changes again.
I'm gonna let Mr. Pons do that too. In terms of building heights, I'm happy as a clam to see the fact that we are solidifying some building heights. Though I do think we need to be clear about what we're doing and probably use stories. Yes.
The 500 feet
Oh, okay.
spacing between the
Yeah.
bar, gas tavern, I mean,
Mhm.
we had a development that, a Chattanooga-style development,
Mhm.
something similar to some of the cities that
Yeah.
we've been to in rivers, but was that not potentially hurting some development?
It could.
If we had a business, entertainment area that wanted to develop along the river or something like that,
It could.
which we very well could.
Right.
So, why do we want to do that?
Oh, I'm lobbing it
ask-
out there to
Okay,
y'all for a
okay.
good discussion point because,
I mean, again, I don't wanna, I think we need to look for the future of what we want that riverfront to be, and these potential changes could limit that future.
So I know I'm unclear on, like, let's just say you have a hotel. Let's say you had a bar.
Okay.
And let's call it Industry, and it was on the river.
okay.
But then a hotel built next door, and it had one of those bars downstairs. Would they be unable to build their hotel with a bar downstairs because of that? Do you follow what I'm saying? We don't want to create a disincentive for something positive like a hotel because there is a bar within 500 feet,
Yeah.
right?
And by the limiting the 40-foot height or 3 stories, you're limiting potential hotels in this area.
Exactly. That's why we're getting to
In other
talk
words,
about all
if
this
you went over
stuff.
there across the river and put a bar down, you could effectively create you could lower the values of property
Right.
within 500, within 150 yards in either direction.
So this, again, this is carrying forward something that we currently have today that I think this discussion is pertinent because it is something that we've had on the books for a while. And all part of the worry and concern and the vision setting for what our riverfronts become, I think happens when we start talking about the permitted uses within these districts, certainly. But I think the other thing that we get to think about is, okay, the zoning officer for that hotel question that you posed. So if you've got a restaurant on the river that turns into a bar at night, yes, we're gonna say that's a gastropub. Definitely. If that hotel comes through and has a hotel bar inside of it, the primary use there is not, the primary use of that site itself is not the bar.
Okay.
The primary use is the hotel. Now, I'm not the zoning officer anymore. I have to be very careful. But in my head, it's two different things.
That would just be an accessory to a main function, basically.
Right.
Under this requirement, the hotel that was built across the river, Tuscaloosa, right, could not be built. 'Cause
Which
it's 4
one, what
stories.
are you talking about, Tim?
The one,
All right, but wouldn't it
Yes.
be, wouldn't
Right
it
to
have
the
more
right of
than
the bridge,
25,000
Bridge.
square feet?
Oh, no.
See, that would be a large-scale development, and they're up to
well,
6
yes,
stories.
yes, it would.
Yeah, so the large-scale development would allow up to 6 stories, and the council could allow additional height
Right.
and its discretion as well for the height question.
Sorry, I missed that.
No, don't worry.
I remember when Tutwiler was built, I was in elementary school at Verner, say around 1970. I was probably 7 or 8 years old. If you look at scale and the height, there was nothing like it.
Mhm.
But I don't know that it was particularly out of, that's back when they were building all those modern buildings, and I don't think anybody sat there and went, this is way out of whack, because my first thought is scale and keeping everything in scale. Then I started thinking about Tutwiler, and nobody was up in arms about Tutwiler, but the nearest building was probably the stadium. I mean, there's a lot to consider there. And I guess ultimately, we'll have to make that call, and then will we recommend that to the council, or are we the final?
It will be up to the council. So this is going to be one of those processes that you get to keep as a planning commission. You'll get to make a recommendation that goes on to the council. And I think also one of the nice things we'll be able to bring you in future discussions is we'll be able to start graphically presenting to you what this can look like using some software to show you, all right, listen, if we go 6 stories here, this is what this could look like. If we go 3 in this location, here's your scaling, here's your massing. Because I know that not everybody is as spatially and visually driven as some of us are lucky enough to be. You've got to be able to see it on the screen. And so I think that will help us make some decisions or help y'all make some decisions in the future. So, ready for the next one? Let's pull that Band-Aid. Sidewalks.
What do we decide on the 500?
So right now, sidewalks, It says, shall be surfaced with pavers or imprinted concrete. And a couple folks noted, that's great. It's going to increase some costs, though. And so it may be something that we want to re-examine. For our parking locations, the current draft may be a bit too restrictive for an oddly shaped lot. So I start thinking about our existing riverfront developments. Right now, it says that the current draft says that the parking shall locate to the side of the building, or if it's just not practicable at all, then it can locate between the building and the street. Well, some of our recent developments, the Bend, what's being built in the Rice Mine Road Loop area, there's parking all over. It's definitely between the front facade and the street, but I think someone who was trying to split hairs could argue too that there's parking between the buildings and the river. But it's a development site as a whole, so I'd like to erase some of the ability to split hairs. The other part of it is, okay, let's talk about and I never know what to call it, I just always say it's the development along the river to the east of Tuscaloosa Tourism and Sports, where Another Broken Egg, River, et cetera, are located. I know that was built very intentionally. The way that it is laid out on the site, yes, it's got a small parking area off to the side, and that was for the public for the most part. If we had required those buildings to be a little bit squattier, let's compress them instead of having each unit being front and back, where each unit basically has a view of the river. Each commercial area has a view of the river. It may not have accomplished the good that it has done down there. It may not be as successful as it was if the regulations that in this draft, because this lets us start to test and think about, okay, how would this impact something else? And so I think we need to address a little bit of that parking location question to eliminate the doubt. In terms of signs, again, we're just going to revisit this. One of the things of note was that a maximum of 80 square feet per sign. If you had a project of distinction or something along those lines, an 80 square foot sign may not be enough for something in a riverfront district. You don't want it to be intrusive on adjoining properties at all, but 80 square feet for a larger building may be too small. Lighting, right now it says that lighting should be Alabama Power Company installed. That may not be the right language. I think the intent was fine and kind of mimics what is within the current regulations. I don't know that that should really be within the current regulations, to be real honest. We also want to specify again that lighting should be directed downward to reduce spillover and light pollution. When we get into building orientation, right now the requirement is that single building developments be configured with the long axis of the building parallel to the street it fronts. Again, when we start thinking about some of these larger developments, I don't know that that necessarily works for everything. I know its intention is right. I know its intention is good. But in practice, I don't know that we need to be that shall about it. Clarifying the intent behind building facades facing the Riverwalk, providing views of the Riverwalk as well. That came up a few times. Folks wanted to know, does that mean every building in the development would need a view of the river, of the Riverwalk? And I mean, internally I want to say, yeah, what's the point of building on the river if you can't see the river? But also I get it. Like, you can't have every building having a full view of the river or the Riverwalk. So let's provide some clarity there. Similar discussions about building materials that we had within the downtown area. Of course, native stone being called natural stone. Give some examples. Glass curtain wall is listed still as a primary use. Do we want to keep it there? I know it was controversial in the past. The folks that I've gotten to talk to over the last couple weeks on this, they're high and low on the one building that we have. So, and then, oh, go ahead, Mr. Rumsey. But then the vinyl siding is also listed as an accent along with ephes for trim only. Are we still okay allowing vinyl as an accent material limited to 25%? Also, EFS for trim only would be limited to 25%. Again, if we don't allow it, it increased cost, but I do understand the concerns with both of those materials. And then finally, transitions. To note, we want to make sure that when we get into our buffer standards between zones, that the buffers allow for appropriate transitions to happen near neighborhoods. We do have a lot of property in the riverfront area that is near established neighborhoods. We want to make sure that we are not slamming a 6-story something adjacent to a single-story house potentially. Yes, ma'am.
I have 2 questions
Cool.
about the vinyl and the EFS. What is the alternative to the vinyl? Is that the cement board? I don't know much
It
about
is.
building material. And doesn't the cement board look more like maybe wood than the vinyl does? And I may have this wrong also, but it seems like I know is the EFS the material that we've had lawsuits over in the past?
It's the farm.
But for trim only, it's okay?
It's fine for
Okay,
trim,
okay,
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
The new buzzword in the industry is synthetic.
Synthetic.
Ah,
Oh, okay,
synthetic
goodness,
plaster.
Yes, that,
Yeah.
No longer used.
okay,
Wasn't that stuff like a sponge or something that just?
yeah,
Phone
yeah.
back.
It's got its uses.
Yeah, I mean, for trim, you know, it should be fine, because
I know it's definitely come a long way.
exactly.
I hate to be the guy that makes this meeting go on. A couple of things. What did we decide on the 500 feet? I mean,
I don't know that y'all decided.
okay, that's one thing. You mentioned the pavers and imprinted concrete for sidewalks along the river. So elevation is going out of all about wrong, putting concrete sidewalks along the river, correct?
Yes, sir.
I mean, concrete sidewalks work. They work for the river.
Okay.
They're economical. You're saddling projects with what I think are undue costs and could effectively stop running projects out of budget because exponentially going up in cost. And then, regardless of whatever we decide, if y'all thought about some kind of MOU with Northport about their section of the river that's right across from us, would they follow suit? Is there any conversation that, hey, this is what we're doing, would y'all enter into the same thing? Because there is a large section of the riverfront that's undeveloped in Northport that is ripe for development.
Yes, you're right.
The housing authority.
I like to have those conversations.
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's something that you need to look into, but,
That, your question about the 500, I guess I'm still unclear. So you answered the hotel question,
Okay.
but it just seems like if people are on foot and you have like an entertainment district, it seems like 150 yards is a long way.
you're gonna have, I mean, I agree with you, and that's, I think it limits what, there's some potential projects being talked that this wouldn't stop.
Maybe you could show us like on the river, like that river bend development. I mean, does that have anything to do, like, let's say they had I vaguely remember they had 2 towers for condos, then they had an office building, maybe a bank. I can't remember what all they had, but maybe you could show us what would be allowed, say in that development, how many bars would be allowed if people were walking. Remember we had that debate about the Riverwalk,
Oh, yeah.
and we decided to pull it to the street? But let's say the Riverwalk stayed where it was and it connected to that Cypress Inn. On that site, you would only be able to have 1 bar, right?
The Ben project, you would only be able to have one bar.
Yep.
One bar, one gas.
And that sounds a little
It
restrictive.
is very restricted, I think it is.
Okay. I hear you. What do you think that number could be?
I just hate picking winners and losers, and because you could have somebody literally get an alcohol license and sit on it and hold everybody hostage.
What,
Could you say so many bars within so many feet, so say 3 within, I don't know, I'm trying to get away from the 500.
I guess, what's the intent of this ordinance? Is the intent to not have a district with everything with bars in it? Is that what we're doing? I mean,
So that portion has been in place for as long as I can remember.
Yeah.
I think the intent was probably to keep it from clustering.
so I mean, and at risk of creating another, why do we need to limit it? I think the market itself would limit that in a development along the river.
I think the downtown's where it all began because we didn't want to have downtown turn to the strip.
That's what we.
Well,
And
and
that,
you
and that
also,
makes sense.
and I think another thing to think about,
But you can only have so many nail salons.
I agree. I mean,
Okay.
I think we've gotten this student mentality, everything's a student-oriented bar or apartment, which it shouldn't be.
sure.
And the rivers, everybody's in Tuscaloosa, both sides. So I'm like you on the downtown height of the buildings. Why limit it?
Well, and another thing to think about on this 500-foot discussion is that bars and gastropubs, both of those uses are conditional uses subject to review and approval by the city council. I don't know that the council is going to want to see that changed in a new zoning ordinance either. So your bars and gastropubs each one will come through council to determine whether it's appropriate or not.
Yeah, and they have to apply for a liquor license.
Right.
And so, I mean, I think the potential of having a nice restaurant that serves alcohol, the potential to have a watering hole in a development, the potential to have an ice cream shop that serves vodka-infused ice cream or something. I mean, I don't.
New business idea.
Yeah, right. I mean, I just don't see us limiting that.
So,
Okay.
so Ashley, if we take the 500 out, what you're saying is the council could regulate how many based off of, at their discretion.
I think Temerson Square is a good example for right now. So right now, bars and gastropubs are technically unlimited within the Temerson Square area, and they were for a long time. But also, each one has to be reviewed and approved by the Tuscaloosa City Council. And so if a new bar comes in, that person has to first apply to even have the use. They come to the city council and say, hi, I'd like to operate as a bar. These are my hours of operation. This is what I'm going to do. This is my safety plan. This is my lighting plan. This is what I'm going to do to minimize risk. And then the city council gets to hear that in a public hearing, and they vote it up or down. If they vote it up, then they come for their ABC license. So it's a 2 public hearing process.
So this would follow suit on the river.
Unless the city council wants to see that go away. But I think, not to speak for them, but we've had a few of those lately.
Gotcha.
So like the Cypress Inn,
Mhm.
it had a liquor
So that
license.
can regulate.
Yes.
Would that stop you from being able to have one 150 yards? Is that-
No.
So you could have, as long as it's a restaurant, you can have one after the other. It's just
Sure.
bars.
Right. It's all in that definition, which we'll get into on September 7th. But the definition of bar, definition of gastropub, is that use meeting that definition?
I know I'm splitting hairs like Tim said, but the Cypress Inn had a restaurant and then it had a bar. But if you blend the products that they sold, they did. But people would still go to
Yeah.
their bar.
And just to have a drink,
Yeah.
not to eat, yeah.
And I don't think it was a bad thing. I mean, it was a good thing, really. The river, people like to look at water and drink and eat.
That's true.
I mean,
If I get a chance to sit outside on a patio during dinner, I'm going to.
yeah, I mean, it's just, I think that it would almost be a disincentive to development if you weren't taking advantage of the fact that part of our growth rate is determined by people that want to come and want to enjoy the riverfront, and they're coming back to a lot of times they're coming back to the alma mater. I don't know, I'm kind of with Tim on that when I start thinking about restrictions and where, now the flip side, you brought up New Orleans. I don't think any of us envision people walking down the street, just having it be bar after bar after bar after bar.
Well, and that would also require entertainment district changes and all kinds of other stuff. So I think you're exactly right. So it sounds, if I'm summarizing what I've just heard from you, it sounds like you may not want to see that 500-foot spacing being maintained because as long as that conditional use requirement still is there. As long as council is still continuing to review that, then we may not want to see that spacing stay.
That would be my thoughts.
Heads are going north,
In the
south?
same vein as the entertainment district.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know the bars have gotten out of hand when these guys are driving these bicycles with all these girls in there. Been in Nashville, and the guy's serving drinks. He's walking up and down, and it's and they're pulling it with a tractor. Your bars have gotten a little bit out of whack when people are doing that.
Well,
You know what I'm talking about? Have you seen a John Deere tractor and there's 12 or 15 people sitting on seats being drugged through town and somebody's wearing a wedding dress?
See the hot tub one?
I mean, it's
nuts.
Somewhere in the middle.
Somewhere in the middle of that, okay.
But the market drives everything. We
I know.
had one of the pedal bikes here. It didn't fly. So I'm just
That's true.
saying.
I forgot about
back to
that.
the height on the market.
So does the council, so the council will find itself in a situation where they're having to turn somebody down, not necessarily based on their product being bad, but because of the products that are already being offered in an area.
Possibly.
And that's gonna take, a tough demeanor on their part because you don't want it to get too far gone. Right? All right, let me ask you this. You work here at City Hall and you've got like Moe's on the corner and they're kind of a bar, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a bar that says 100 beers or something next to it, somewhere in there.
A world of beer, yeah.
And then on the other side, you've got that fancy bar where they wear those headsets and things on the other side.
Session, okay, yeah.
Okay, so you've got a bunch of bars on this block. Is that a problem?
No, I
Is
don't-
it seen as a problem by anyone?
I think they mostly behave themselves.
I mean, that's probably the best example I've got here.
So in theory, are
That's
they?
three within
are they in
100 yards.
compliance? That's right.
I'm sorry?
So would they be in compliance with the bar regulations we have in place now?
But
So this is for the riverfront.
But I'm saying, but right now, we have a downtown.
Oh,
switch on
those are
bars.
both, yep, those are gastropubs. Moe's and World of Beer are gastropubs, which means they are restaurants during the day. They may morph into a bar at night. I think actually Moe's is not doing as much of it as they used to.
But then around the corner from Moe's is the
booth.
yeah. So that's
And they're in compliance. Nobody is out of compliance with the zoning ordinance today. All right, do we have anything else on the riverfront that we want to talk about? I got 2 more zones. Ms. Prince has stuff.
Okay, no, the sidewalks. Okay,
Cool.
I totally agree that pavers are, not too expensive, okay?
Right.
But what if you use concrete, but ever so often you just put in a row of pavers just to kind of break it up? Or a row of something? I mean,
can't-
and I don't know how many linear
accent.
feet that would be, but.
I think what I may do is take that and say, okay, listen, within the riverfront planned development, perhaps this is an option that exists for them.
you call it, what we call it is accent pavers. You put concrete with accent pavers around it, a border,
Yeah.
frame.
we spend a
concrete,
fortune
something like that.
putting it in for all the blind people where they could feel where they could feel where they could tell that they were at an intersection. I hadn't seen any blind people walking downtown, but if they are, I guess they know that they're at the intersection.
Oh, that's truncated.
That's kind of part of the design.
All right, Commission, let's go to the downtown perimeter.
Have you ever seen?
So our downtown perimeter is a new district that incorporates guidance from the downtown edge character type from the comp plan. So basically, we took the BGO intent statement from the zoning district and we updated it to reflect that the downtown perimeter, the DP district, will be limited to the lands surrounding the downtown district as well as some lower intensity districts. So you see that it supports a variety of moderate intensity office and commercial uses that may be mixed with medium-scale family multi-residential, a range of attached residential uses like triplexes and townhouses, allows a variety of civic and institutional uses, again, is pedestrian-friendly as a transition between your high-density downtown district and your lower-density development adjacent. So when you start to, if you've pulled up your map in your head, this is that area that is not BC within today's zoning district. This is what you start to see as you go south. You've got that high-intensity BC district along University Boulevard, and we are headed south towards 15th. And so this is that transitional space, and you see the building blocks there, your height ranges, 2 stories minimum, 1.5 stories for residential north of Bryant, and then 1 to 4 stories south of Bryant. We're going to get into a little bit of that here in a second. Building setbacks are 0 to 30 feet. Parking is shared. Parking areas located behind buildings, also on street. We want to allow space for pickup and to-go orders. So what that translated into within the zoning district that you got to take a look at is what you see in front of you. So minimum setbacks of 0 feet, maximum of 15. You also see your side setbacks are currently 0. Now, to be fair, things zoned BGO today do not have side and rear setbacks unless they're adjacent to residential districts. So this carries forward the current standards. The building height north of Bryant Drive is a 2-story minimum and a maximum of 80 feet. I'd rather see that go to stories again. We talk about stories in one portion. We need to stay consistent. And then south of Bryant Drive, a maximum height of 45 feet. What I'd also like to see is just this graphic be updated a little bit. Those buildings seem quite intense for this district. We see a lot of townhomes in what is likely to be known as the downtown perimeter. We see a lot of smaller buildings. I think it should be reflective of that character type originally. So some notes from that meeting, those meetings that we held. Again, this is a zone that it's likely more appropriate to measure height in terms of stories, not feet. Additionally, and kind of humorously, when you start thinking about cutting height in the center of Bryant Drive, and you got 80 feet possible on the north side and 45 feet on the south, that's almost a 40-foot difference in height between one street that is our major thoroughfare moving from downtown into, one of our major thoroughfares moving from downtown into campus. That's probably not the most appropriate place to break that height. We either want to look at different breaks or step downs because you do see that continuous movement. As you recall, downtown perimeter even goes on the other side of 15th Street around Drish House. So we want to make sure that those height breaks are appropriate. So we're going to tell the consultants, hey, listen, make us something that makes a little bit more sense so we don't have a 40-foot difference on one street. We want to make it clear that the material standards of downtown apply. It is implied, but it is not obvious, and we need to make sure that, today those material standards apply, standards and guidelines. We want to make sure that the standards downtown continue through. Parking is generally to locate to the rear of the buildings, but definitely not between the front facade and the street. I think in most instances, as I'm driving through this area in my head, I think this is mostly appropriate. You will have some non-conforming buildings, though, that do have parking between the front facade of the street and or front facade and the street. I think about on the corner of 21st Avenue, and I believe that's actually, it's either Bryant or 9th Street. You've got that little family counseling center that has parking in front. You got a few places that have parking in front of it. But is that something that causes you concern? Because the other thing is, we say between the Lurleens, 6th on the north, 15th on the south, and that very auto-centric, very state-controlled routes, we do say, listen, you can have parking between the front facade and the street. There were a few folks who said, do we want to inspire something different here? And I'm going to push that to y'all. I think the ALDOT of it all, and just the fact that those roads on either side are controlled by ALDOT makes it very difficult to do much else because access has to come in off of your streets. So where you locate those buildings, et cetera, and especially drive-throughs and fast food, et cetera, I don't know. I'll put that to y'all in terms of a discussion point if you're interested.
I wish we had done I wish we had done a better job over the years. I hadn't seen an extraordinary amount of bicycle traffic. I don't know why or what we would have to do to catch up with so many communities, but I know that everybody desires more walkability and more bikeability, but we're not really putting things in place to make it happen. I don't know, do we have to be more intentional about it?
Yes. Long story short, yes. I know, the city of Tuscaloosa received a RAISE grant. I forget what the exact number is, but it connects 21st Avenue all the way, University Boulevard, from 21st all the way into campus, improving pedestrian and bike infrastructure. And so I saw the engineering firm out today doing some survey work to start that initial, cost analysis of where we're going to end up on this. So that is coming. But yeah, we need to be more intentional with it.
I would like to see it.
All right. So last but not least, we have the Downtown Historic Edge. And this is a new district that is supposed to be similar to the downtown perimeter, but at a less intensity. And it is also intended to really help protect the historic districts and support a limited mix of uses and standards. I'm going to be the first to admit, when you get to this graphic, the graphic does not reflect the intent, nor does the graphic really help reflect the purpose statement. So we're going to ask them to go back to the drawing board, and we're going to come back on this one. We had some very lively discussion and debate again, and I always appreciate that. But we want the intent, of course, through framework was to continue historic preservation efforts. This drawer is haunted, y'all. It keeps on whacking me. To maintain existing neighborhood character within local districts, adhering to the Historic Preservation Commission's design guidelines for redevelopment. And I think that's a really important thing to remember is this zoning district, right now, what is historic pink? Is a good mix of BN, BGO, a little bit of R3, but it is very disjointed, and we need to make sure that we've got a set of standards that accomplishes what you see in front of you. And I think the way that it's been written right now may not do that. So your height range you saw was 2.5 stories maximum, generally consistent within a block. Of course, the Historic Preservation Commission and their design guidelines are going to guide what redevelopment, if any, looks like. And of course, within this area, there's not many vacant lots. And a tear down and a rebuild has to be done within what the design guidelines say. Building form, building setbacks, 0 to 20 feet, again, consistent within a block. And so what we saw, again, I'll be the first to say, that graphic is not great. Front setbacks, minimum of 0, maximum of 30. Your setbacks, your building height, again, all of these things have got to be addressed. That building height maximum should be done in stories as it was shown in framework, 2.5 stories max. And so the commission may require larger front setbacks, may require smaller ones. So we want to, again, just some quick notes from those stakeholder meetings. I've mentioned the graphic. We want to measure in height and not feet. But the material standards of downtown at a minimum should apply. But the HPC design guidelines will rule for historic property. I'm asking them to go back and address the statement of intent for this district just to make sure that it really does hit the efforts that were made to even in the creation of historic pink. We just need to make sure we're not missing that mark. So all that being said, I have, oh,
I
okay.
got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
Go back one slide.
Yes, sir.
Talks about HPC design guidelines.
Yes.
You know, we always, a lot of times we'll have a property that's in or near the area, and there's always a conversation, well, what makes it historic? You know, is it where it is, or is it the building, is the building historic itself? I guess that's hard to define sometimes. And I hope that maybe in this design guidelines and this whole EDGE process, we can really help clarify that for people, because I think we struggle sometimes with defining historic. I mean, what is it? I mean, age of the building,
Well,
where it's located?
so
I mean,
I think the quick and easy answer, and I'll give you the quick and easy, is that long ago, we found it important to designate some historic districts by the National Park
Reg-
Service, what they require, what they regulate. Oftentimes, the National Park Service and their historic district regulations say that it's either a building is significant or a district is significant because of the age. Maybe it's a neighborhood that was designed by one person. Maybe it is very reflective of the time in which it was built, and we want to make sure that gets preserved. And so each one of our 20-some historic districts, when they were created, they're part of the national, all but a few of them are within the National Register of Historic Places. And so whoever did it at the time had to say, you know, Pinehurst is important because of this. Druid City Historic District is important because of this. The downtown even. So downtown Tuscaloosa is part of a national historic district. Now, it is not regulated by our local jurisdiction, and locally, that's where the additional regulations are put in place. Because unfortunately, buildings that are on the National Register of Historic Places, I mean, they're not protected. They can be torn down. And so that's where the local designation has become very important for Tuscaloosa itself. Those buildings are thus protected. And so a lot of ours are, they're suite bungalows that were all constructed around the same era. Of course, you've got your large colonial style homes that are reminiscent of that era. But for the most part, that's why they're historic.
But I think what you're saying is that scattered intermittently throughout, there are some structures that have no significance and may be holding the district back. I think University Circle is a great example of homes where people have come in and embraced and invested in the homes and spent a lot of money to make them look better and live better. In fact, there's a lot of areas around, but you take Queen City Avenue intermittently there's some structures down Queen City that would probably be better off with a bulldozer. But there's some great ones. But just because they may be old doesn't mean that maybe they should be.
no, exactly. I think the design is the key to, if you do take something down, what the design looks like it comes back.
Well, I'm thinking about, like, for instance, and I hate to pick on, because I'm sure he invested a lot of, you know, that house on Queen City that's got the paved front yard, the big white one?
He's close to 11th Street. I know that one.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
They paved the front yard, and I don't know if there's significance, I don't know if there's historical significance, but it could probably be something more charming there.
Y'all are trying to open up a can of worms.
I know, but but I think Bill's asking a good question. Is there some parameters you go, okay, is this house historically significant, and should it be protected? And I'm just going to throw that one out there.
The Historic
talking about
Preservation,
now.
so the Historic Preservation Commission, in any instance, and I like that we're kind of intermixing and intermingling, but the HPC, when a house is proposed or a structure is proposed for demolition, they do get to take a look at its significance. They do get to take a look at its importance in the district and why it's there and what it's reminiscent of before something happens. The downtown historic edge is going to apply to historic zoned property, or historic is not a zone, historic district properties. Do y'all have any other questions for me that are not related to the HPC?
No, I didn't want to grab it.
All right, it is public comment time, unless you have any other questions for me.
No, not for now. What, we don't have a sign-up sheet on the public comment, so we'll open it to the public. Anyone would care to speak, make comments on what you've heard this evening, please come forward. Do we have anybody that did sign up online or nobody online? Okay, so anybody in the audience would, Ms. Fitz?
I'll be brief. I'm Kelly Fitz from 19 Audubon Place. Couple of the concerns that I have about the discussions tonight was about the gastropub bar areas and stuff like that. And I think one of the concerns that I have along the riverfront with that would be the Tuscaloosa Country Club area, because I think that that is an area that is surrounded by established neighborhoods, and I would think that they would not favor having a big development that has bars and, you know, that maybe some quiet restaurants, but no gastropubs. And so I think that that needs to be very well spelled out, certain areas where these things are appropriate and are not appropriate. You know, say across the river, close to 82, where there's not established neighborhoods, you know, something with multiple bars or what have you might be appropriate. And so I think that needs to be carefully considered before you just kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater and say no restrictions. My other concern was about heights. Y'all talked about that extensively. I don't see a real problem with establishing a maximum height for downtown. And, you know, you talked about, somebody brought up the fact that, you know, if you don't have these different height variations, that it's kind of boring. Well, I mean, there's a number of cities in the U.S. that have height restrictions, namely Washington, D.C., and I don't think that any of that is boring. So I think that a reasonable height restriction, maybe it's 10 stories, maybe it's 12 stories, might be something to consider, maybe capping it at the height of the AmSouth building. You know, the likelihood that somebody's going to build something taller than that, or as tall as that, is not likely, but you never know. I appreciate the fact that you're taking the signage out of all this. Thank you very much. And as far as the downtown historic properties are concerned, I'm hoping with this that we can create kind of a solidified distinction of the historic properties, so that that 2.5-story max, which would essentially create a angled roof as opposed to, you know, 3-story flat roof, you know, something like that. I think that would be very welcome as a restriction, as it's stated in the current rules. And overall, I appreciate that, you know, all the work that y'all are doing and that Ashley and the staff's doing. So, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else care to make a comment this evening in the audience? Okay, having heard none, no one else has signed up remotely. Ms. Kreitz? Any?
Sorry. All right, Commission, we'll wrap this up this evening then. Of course, we're looking at our next steps, and we've got a meeting in 3 weeks. It's that Wednesday after, what's that, Labor Day. And so we will be sending out what you're looking at, that definitions, nonconformities, some more single-family districts, your multifamilies. In October, we'll begin looking at landscape and buffer standards, parking standards, lighting. November, we get into planned development districts. This will include your riverfront planned development. And then in December, subdivision regulations, part 1. So this is the rest of our year. And so Mr. Wright's so excited. Oh. Yeah. So we'll get these out. There's a lot of definitions, guys. I know there will be some spicy ones. I know that going into it. But we've got to tackle them one at a time. So with that being said, of course, for those Trekking along with us, framework.tuscaloosa.com is your one-stop source for all things framework. Please review the draft articles posted prior to each meeting, submit your comments, view the meeting schedule. And Mr. Wright, unless there's anything else, I'll let you do the honors.
Meeting adjourned.